Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about COP29, Climate Matters. Why is it losing steam? Our guest for the show is Roopmati Khandekar, geopolitical analyst. Welcome to the show, Roopmati.
Aloha, Jay. Thank you for having me on your show. Always my pleasure.
So let's talk about COP29. It was in Azerbaijan. And why there, of all the places in the world? That's really far away from the madding crowd. It's far away from Europe and Asia and Africa and the US. Why is it there?
Jay, so Azerbaijan was always a controversial spot to have the meeting on, mainly because Azerbaijan is one of the biggest producers of oil and gas, and this conference is all about fossil fuels. So starting from the beginning, let's discuss what is COP. So it's the Conference of the Parties, and parties refers to countries that have signed the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Conference on United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So Jay, this document was signed in 1992, and more than 200, around 200 countries signed it. So it's a very comprehensive, all-encompassing global agreement, as we can say it. But this conference is about the countries meeting annually to discuss how they can negotiate approaches to to tackle the root causes of climate change. So one of the key meetings to bring climate change into the news. And so, Jay, this conference is happening in Azerbaijan from around the 11th to the 22nd of November. As we speak, it's on. 40 to 50,000 delegates have attended of all the UN members, climate scientists, trade union leaders, and environmental activists. All of them are present over there. And Jay, but there's a glitch there. Leaders from biggest economies and carbon emitting nations are all over there at Rio, the G20 summit in Brazil. So we have like a fringe meeting going on. And Jay, you remember that the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, what was that about? The world leaders wanting temperatures to not rise more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we have a foundation for that. And the key issue in this conference, in this convention, is to get countries to develop a new cash target for developing countries by 2025. So this term known as climate financing is the keyword, Jay, and they want to help developing economies to cut their carbon emission and to cope with the climate changes that happen because of the rising temperatures. So, Jay, majority of these states are African and small states, and their demand is that the climate financing should exceed $1 trillion by 2030. So that is climate financing in a gist. So, and Jay, big issue in this is that China and the Arab Gulf states are categorized as developing countries, so they are not part of the financing. So imagine the the problems in getting the finance, reaching these financial targets when we have the biggest contributors not over there present at all. So this is what happens, Jay. And Azerbaijan, another reason why it's controversial, because the Azerbaijan president, his name is Ilham Aliyev, and he got up and told in the conference that oil and gas are a gift of God, and countries which are blessed with this should not be blamed for using them or having them for international trade. And he has used this conference to advertise Azerbaijan for investment purposes. So it's a mess, Jay. It's as big as a mess as the solutions to climate change right now.
Those trillions, is the U.S. participating in that? Because Trump has called it a hoax. I don't know if Joe Biden is all that enthusiastic here in the last days of his administration. Is the U.S. likely going to be a big contributor to, meeting that demand for funding?
Yeah, Jay. So now this 2024 is something like a trial basis conference. Nobody's paying attention to it. You have Joe Biden's team attending it, but not pushing any agenda. We all know that Trump is a climate change skeptic. He does not want to do anything with climate, and his victory has seen by climate experts as a big setback to this climate financing system, because he's expected to withdraw from the Paris Agreement and cut down on climate financing big time. So, Jay, you have this, and Joe Biden also at the G20 summit not giving priority to this. Now, the next 2025 conference that will happen in Brazil. That 2025 is the time when the countries will be renewing their 5-year action plans. So that makes it all the more important. This is the closing year of the 5-year action plan. So it's just like a draft convention where they're just discussing and planning, but the main framework will be laid down in the next meeting. So Azerbaijan falls back one more shot on that front too, Jay.
No, this is all biblical, as time goes by, the resolve of the parties in all the COP meetings seems to be waning. They're not meeting their goals. They're not really addressing the problem. And when we look in the newspaper, we find out that there are an increased number of threatening storms and extreme weather, floods, sea level rise, you name it. And all of that causes disruption among countries and human beings in general in the form of migration, and that leads to political issues. So I don't know whether the world is fully educated about Al Gore's concern over an inconvenient truth, 25, 30 years ago. I don't know if the people in this conference are really committed and the countries are really committed. What I see is the storms will continue, and we that is collectively the human race doesn't really do much about it. It's biblical, isn't it?
Yeah, sure, Jay. We had intense heat waves and deadly storms. We had Helen and Milton slamming into the US. You have now these fossil fuels are actually, to just give you a background on this, they are the main cause of climate change. The burning of these gases releases carbon dioxide, which causes global warming. And Jay, this is a greenhouse gas that is released. So, Jay, we have not had any progress. This greenhouse emission, carbon dioxide emission, has increased by 0.8% as compared to last year, rising up to 37.4 billion tons, Jay. So we are not making any progress on that. The developing countries make a pitch that they're putting up fossil fuels. They are in the earlier stages of development and they need fossil fuels for progress, and that's a cheaper source of energy. So they're saying the developed countries have reached their development mode, and now they want the lesser developed countries to not come up to that standard, so they're implementing these climate change restrictions. So that's a big debate, north-south debate that happens, that climate change is used as a tool for hampering the growth trend lines, and they refuse to implement these climate change issues. But Jay, we know that it's a comprehensive problem. What happens in one country will affect the other country. So that's why we have small islands which need to be taken care of. If a factory somewhere in China or India is sending out emissions, eventually it will affect the smaller states in the Pacific or in the Atlantic more faster than it would affect these inland countries. So, but it's going to affect the human race as a whole, and definitely in the long term, everybody. Nobody's immune to it. We saw the Spanish floods just recently. It just happened, rising levels in the Mediterranean, and nobody could stop it. There are clips of people walking on the streets, and suddenly the flash floods come in. So who's to blame for it, and who will pay the price for it? It's everybody, anybody, anytime.
Yeah, that's why I say it's biblical. I mean, everything that everybody does around the world contributes to this, and all of us do not recognize the importance of taking this action. And in the U.S., it wasn't really even a platform plank. And people around the U.S. are completely uninformed about the connection between all these storms and floods and droughts and sea level rises, the problems with agriculture and migration. They don't connect that with climate change. And I find that the U.S. is really behind on this because it is one of the biggest contributor, if not the biggest contributor, of greenhouse gases. So for the powers that be to say, well, progress is more important, industrial production is more important, the economy is more important, is really, it's really inappropriate. It's not what's happening. What's happening is we have climate change is taking over the world. So let me ask you my Christmas future question. If all these things continue, and if COP and any other conference that people set up, doesn't do anything, and people, make promises they don't keep, and they really don't connect things up to realize that climate change is up to all of us, what happens to the world?
Jay, climate change is inevitable. That's the line that has to be considered very hard. And what happens for climate change movements, Jay, it is more of discussion and less of implementation. So that's why we don't have a effective solution to these issues, Jay. We don't have intergovernmental cooperation at the level that it should be. We don't have organizations which keep their promises. We don't have funding which can be diverted to saving human lives rather than making a standard of living for humans better. But this is the kind of difference that is happening, Jay. And what we see in the future is there's so many nations which are facing coastlines which are completely, you can see visible changes on the coast, and you have small islands, especially Hawaii, which is at risk, greater risk than like Russia or China or whatever we say. But Jay, it is that global warming is changing the kind of varieties of plants that grow, the animals that exist. It's going to come visibly so drastically fast because human race is at such a point that we are at breakneck speed for development, but there is no attention given to a balanced development. Jay. Glaciers melt, we watch it on news and we let go of it. That is the problem, Jay.
Yeah, it'd be somebody else's problem later.
Yeah,
and that's so inconsiderate of the next generation. Not 10 generations away, but only one generation away, really. So if I gave you the trillions that these guys are asking for, the activists would like to see in Azerbaijan, what would you do with it? How, I know this is a hard question, but how would you arrest or slow down climate change with the money? How would you apply the money?
Small thing to do, Jay, but to pump the entire thing into renewable sources of energy and electric batteries and sources, because these sources, which are an alternative to fossil fuels, the only setback to them is that they're very expensive to upkeep and to establish. So we have a replacement of fossil fuels is taking a longer time than we imagine. For the windmills and the solar batteries, the wind doesn't move every day and the sun doesn't shine every day. So this kind of setback that windmills and solar batteries has to be caught up with. You have more, or you have the electric batteries which can be brought into more affordable ranges, And Jay, you know the Solar Alliance, which is being headed by India, that is a big thing of the belt of countries which are receiving solar energy at a higher level than the northern hemisphere. So they are trying to promote this concept of solar energy. So um, this kind of just pumping this entire amount into renewable sources, the first point of action, because any other source, Jay, we don't have that to have financing to shut down industries or have financing to relocate population. We don't have that. Just we can do is do the best we can and put up renewable sources of energy, Jay.
Aside from the really shocking things that happened, like the flood in Spain, and some of these storms we have that are so destructive in the American Southeast, there's more subtle changes that happen. And I give you, for example, the effect that climate change has in Africa, where people can't grow anything, so they starve. This starvation creates political problems, and they can't stay where they are. They can't live, in a drought. They can't live where they can't grow food. It's simple. And so they have to move. And they move north in the promise that there's a better life and food and less starvation going north out of the global south. And they wind up in Europe. And when they wind up in Europe, that creates a political problem, logistical problems, all kinds of problems, because somebody has to take care of them. And they may not be ready to participate in those communities up north. This disruption, seems to me, is a direct result of the subtle but direct result of climate change in places that are more subjected to it. And we talk about problems in the Middle East. We talk about problems, in Europe, in Eastern Europe especially. I suggest to you that climate change is a factor in all of that. That somehow climate change drives this migration of people, and the migration of people, the demand for a better life somewhere else, into these contentions and wars. What do you think about that?
You're so right about this one, Jay. It's really very pinpoint that you have done that how climate change affects migration. You always look for greener pastures or to escape the hardships that climate brings you, and so this migration happens. And the after effect consequences of climate change are so intense right now that we can't afford a mass migration into a better place for somebody like affected from Africa. They will of course move to Europe, and Europe is already facing a migration crisis. So it will create havoc, like you said. And Jay, it's so right that this migration cannot be stopped because it's going to be for survival. It's not going to have political boundaries. And that's where the real problem comes in, because then no international organization can come into the picture, because the people will be defending existential movement, like you say. And uh, this climate change that you talk about is not only affecting the people, the animals, the crops. When we earlier spoke about the glaciers, it's also melting the ice and opening these new viruses which we have in the permafrost. So we have a risk of future pandemics to unknown diseases also coming up. So many things. It's a multifaceted problem, and we don't have a multifaceted resolution to this. We need a very united front on this, Jay.
Speaking of that, speaking of a united front, I'm thinking of Greta Thunberg. The poster child. Now she's not such a child anymore, but for activism on climate change, and she made a comment about this Azerbaijan COP29, that she was skeptical of whether any progress would be made. And I can understand that. She's been following it since she was in her early teens, and she's participating to the extent possible, and she's been a global poster child about it. But and we have in our minds, I'd be interested in your thoughts about it. We have in our minds that the next generation, the younger Z people, they understand how climate change is going to affect their lives. They don't think it's a hoax, and they're going to insist as activists on some action by business and industry, national governments, what have you, to deal with it. But I was very disappointed in the elections here in the United States a couple of weeks ago, that the younger people who just came around to voting age really didn't understand, and they did not vote for the position, the platform of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. They voted for the platform of Trump, who rejects climate change, who thinks climate change is a hoax, who says drill baby drill, frack baby frack, and he is not going to help, and they did not stand up on this issue. So as effective as Greta Thunberg used to be, and may still be, I don't think the younger generation gets the message. And I don't think that you and me can rely on them to carry the ball on this. This is of great concern. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Jay, right on. Generation Z is not going to get the planet like it is now. It's going to get a very deteriorated climate. And because they don't understand the intensity of this, climate change has been on their priority list of selection of candidates right at the bottom, Jay. They have never given it a thought. They read, say, a snowstorm in Saudi Arabia as a fleeting news section. They don't give attention to why would a desert have a snowstorm, or why would there be a flash flood in Spain, or why there's a melting glacier. They don't give a second thought to why is it and why not. And they think about saving water, saving animals. This is it just it just is confined to posters and slogan. They don't have that zeal to put it into action, or to force lawmakers to put it into action. Now, like you said, they have elected a setup which does not care about climate change. So it was their duty as first time voters to exercise their right to bring in an administration which stands strong on climate change, because it's going to affect their future. So this is the paradox that they face, Jay.
Well, it's very troubling. And I keep thinking of the frog in the water, because this thing is relentless. It gets worse, and people get to accept it. It becomes the norm. You see a flood, you see a storm, you see sea level rise. That's probably the most gradual of all, and you don't see it as an emergency. The scientists may see it as an emergency, and the activists, such as there are, may see it as an emergency. But people in general, they get acclimated to it. And my concern is that over time we are the frog in the water. It's the temperature is gradually heating up, and nobody's doing anything to stop it. And in a few years' time, it will be much worse, and we will essentially accept it because we got used to it. It was the norm. It became the norm. And COP29, all the COPs are a kind of metric, a canary in the coal mine on this, to the extent that these conferences of parties are, aggressive and they achieve the notion of raising money to deal with climate change. COP29 is an example of how much we care. And I suggest to you, and I think if Greta were here with us now, she would agree that we don't care, and it's just going to happen to us. And you see, pawn it off to the next generation, but the next generation is not willing to take the torch. And so, as a matter, it's biblical again, as a matter of accepting the change, we accept the change without trying to fix it. And I think the 4 years that we now have under Trump, nobody in this country is going to be too interested in fixing it. They won't be able to fix it. And activists will be undermined by what he does or doesn't do about climate change. And that will affect, the attitudes in Europe. So all these things considered, I think we're in for a hard time.
Yes, Jay, because COP29, see, now the main agenda is the fossil fuel, the climate finance, everything. And G20 has completely omitted fossil fuel phase out. So this is kind of kept the COP29 agenda on a back burner. You should have coordination at the international level, and that is where we lack. Suppose you have a G20 meeting that the leaders are attending and they cannot attend COP29, they should bring that agenda onto the G20 front at the same time that is happening in COP29. And that is where our diplomatic channels fail so badly, Jay. International organizations become irrelevant, and because of their lack of implementation of decisions, Jay. The decisions are fabulous on paper, but nothing in action. Like the scientists have said that the temperature of the Earth will rise by 3 degrees by the end of the century. So everybody's relaxed for the end of the century. Let it happen. So nobody's calling out the urgency. You have these lines which are 1.5 degrees, all these things coming up, but nobody gives a second thought about how much it's going to be urgent, how much flood levels are going to rise. You don't have pictures of how the coastlines are receding. Like you said before, the problem becomes localized, but the resolution has to be global. Uh, it's exactly that, Jay. There's no coordination between global and local.
We have all this news going on. The newspaper is filled with Trump's appointments and Trump's, 25 agenda, and filled with wars in Europe and the Middle East. It's filled with contention with China and its development. I mean, the same old news just gets worse and worse and occupies all of our attention. And it essentially takes our attention away from the most existential threat that we have to humanity. And that means everybody, each one of us. And so the news does not include a whole lot of news about climate change. I like to look at the section in the Washington Post because every day the Washington Post has a story about climate change. I can't say that about a lot of newspapers, and certainly not about a lot of TV news productions in this country. So I think what's happening, it's going off the stage. This is very problematic, and there's a certain failure on the part of the media to raise this issue to top priority 5-alarm fire. I mean, when they have a storm or a flood or a sea level story to report, you don't get a whole lot of information about how this is an expression of climate change. Do you think the media could do better, Roopmati?
Absolutely, Jay. Warning systems get into place, but constantly reminding people of the dangers of climate change is such a must have. It should be one of the headlines because it's going to, like you said, affect each and every one of us. And receding it to one column or one section or, the back pages is not going to add to this. It's something like an asteroid, Jay. We might not know it's coming until it's too close for action and nothing we can do about it. So when the storm or cyclone is forming, we only know the intensity when it hits land. We only know what kind of devastation it will cause when it hits land, or how much power it will fizzle out when it hits land. So we don't know what nature will bring. The force of nature is, Jay, very what do you say, very hard and dynamic, and humans have no control over it, but we poking nature in every which way by deforestation, by global warming, fossil fuels, industrialization, modified GOM, modified crops, all these things are tingling with nature's way of life, Jay, and that is not acceptable to nature, and so it reacts.
People don't realize that it's could be lethal. It is often lethal. These expressions of climate change kill people.
Yes.
And the newspaper dutifully reports how many people were killed. But if you made a chart, you would find that over time, the more climate change, the more people die. And I think you could extend that into the future. The more climate change, the more people die. Whether it be
Yes.
from these direct effects like storms and floods and fires and what have you, or from the more indirect effects like civil wars in Sudan, where people die. And I think if people could understand that it's really not important to have this other news, these other events that occupy attention, that we have to attend to this because our lives, everybody says, oh, it happened in Spain. Who cares? It's in Spain. No, but it could happen here any day. It could happen where you live, where I live. It could happen where anyone lives in one way, one expression or another. But I don't think people understand that at all.
Jay, see, the Earth is a living organism. So it breathes, it moves, it grows, it uh, lives, Jay. And when something hurts it to a point where it can't take it, like our body doesn't like a infection or a germ, we will get rid of it. In the same way, when the humans hurt nature to such an extent that it won't be able to take, like you said, it will start eliminating human lives. We will become the virus for Earth and it will eliminate us through this climate change catastrophe. It is so urgent and so inevitable that it will happen because Earth will live on whether irrespective of the human race. That is a fact that we have to accept. It's been before us, it's going to be after us. But how we treat it is most important, and that is where climate change is so necessary.
You really wonder what will happen here. Now, you mentioned there's going to be another uh, climate change conference in Brazil, not too distant, was it next month or something? What is the nature of that? It seems to me. Let me add this. It seems to me that the failure of the COP conferences all through the years has been that they're interested in collecting money and collecting promises. But what they don't talk about is making everybody aware of the lethal risks that are presented by climate change. Call it the information war, so that people understand this is the most existential threat to humanity that we have ever had. And I think a COP29 misses the boat on that. We're talking about raising money, but they don't talk about making people understand why it's important to provide the money. And I think that's a failure. Now, the question is, how is the Brazil conference going to differ? Who's going to be there? What are they going to say? What kind of promises can be made? Are they going to do better than COP29?
Definitely much better than COP29 because it's turned out to be a dab event, Jay. Nothing much happening. And they have literally, Jay, it's normalized this meeting of climate every week, every year, and in different places. They have just kept it down to discussion. They have downgraded it to discussion. There is no action. And that is our problem, Jay. And the one that is going to happen next year in Brazil, like I told you before, it's going to be a renewal of their 5-year plans. Every country has a 5-year plan that they look into their targets that has set their reduction of fossil fuels. So China has said it will reduce fossil fuel by 1/3 or something like. So all these things, how much dependence on renewable sources of energy will be discussed. Climate financing, they want it to reach 1 trillion by 2030, but how much will come in after the US refuses to donate as much in these next 4 years is going to be a big setback to climate change. But where the money goes also is a very important thing, Jay, because we have corruption in the pipeline. We have diversion of this money into channels which are not necessary. There are fundraisers and meetings which just go as verbal meetings. There is no implementation to the point. Does this money go to the small islands to what do you say, to relocate the populations to better places? It doesn't. It just doesn't. It goes into the capitals and conventions where the delegates meet. They have a nice dinner and a get together, and they discuss, they draft, and they go away, Jay. Nothing happens at the point of impact. That is our problem.
This raises in my mind something that you and I have talked about a number of times, and that is the need for a global effort, a global government, if you will. These ad hoc conferences that aren't necessarily guaranteed of any success, that keep on happening without effective results, are really not, in my mind, not a solution. What the world needs is a global organization, a global government global federation where they all come down and they all try to find a resolution. And of course, the United Nations comes to mind, and we have discussed many times how ineffective it is. But I wonder, theoretically, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a global government that would say, look, no more wars in the Eastern Europe. We're not going to let you do that, and no more of this terrorism in the Middle East, and no more of this uncontrolled migration and civil war violence in Africa. No more of this gangland killing in Latin America and so forth. Don't we need something like that? The United Nations is probably not capable in its present form of doing anything like that. But isn't that a sort of a global solution?
Yeah, so right, Jay, so right on this, because what you speak about is perfect. Like we have the federal government in our country, where you have the government at Washington taking care of big issues, the state governments taking of the issues that affect the state. Like that line, you need a global government to take care of these issues and who can concentrate on these issues which are going to affect everybody. Like you said, climate change, war, these are things which affect each and every person on the globe. Terrorism, it's not that you can be immune from it. And countries need when you have a world government, like you say, they're going to be able to coordinate better, implement better, and also to provide resolutions on an urgent basis. We have too much of delay, Jay, on the international forum. It's unimaginable how we see it now. G20 happening, nothing being discussed about the Israel bombing. Every day it's being bombed, or Ukraine bombing, or anything. It all goes on to the back burner. There is no urgent resolutions to current situations. And when these huge conflicts, yesterday, I think Russia, Ukraine have completed 1,000 days of war. So nothing urgent, Jay, nothing happening. So when will they react to climate change, which is a slow ongoing process? They're not giving any attention to this issue. So your world government gives the right solution. It's the right resolution, Jay, for this problem.
Okay, well, now here's my final and perhaps my most challenging question. What would have to happen for us to get there? Because to me, that is a solution. Of course, the devil is in the details, and it would have to be organized to the satisfaction of all the participants. And it would have to be, politically successful on a global scale. But what would have to happen? Now, I remind you that that World War I resulted in the League of Nations, which didn't last very long. World War II resulted in the United Nations, which has lasted arguably until now, but on a declining basis. Would it take a global conflagration, a war? Would it take a climate change event that killed a lot of people to make all the nations understand that they have to work together? What would it take to have this global government?
You're so right about this. There needs to be a catastrophe for this coming together, but they can't make the existing infrastructure more effective. That is our setback, Jay. That they have everything in place. They have the secretariat, they have the offices, they have the personnel, they have everything, but they're not making it effective. You have with great power comes great responsibility. That's the line in we superhero movies. But now we need powerful leaders with big responsibilities to take up this issue of climate change, Jay, because it's not that we can't provide resolutions. We don't have the implementing force. These leaders are too busy in their own personal things, Jay. Now, like Trump is elected another 2 years and we have campaigning for the next term. So who will bring climate change to the forefront? It was just an issue in the campaigning. It was just another in developing countries like mine or China, that is not even an issue to be discussed. It is not even on the charts. You have more current things like population, economy, war, antagonistic neighbors. Israel has terrorism, Ukraine has Russia, all these things. Europe has migration. So, where does climate change fit in? It won't fit into people's action, like we have discussed in so many of our issues, Jay. It all comes down to personal, what do you say, choices, preferences, and implementation. How much you use your fossil fuel. It will not be too much, but if so many people try to come together and bring this as a priority in daily life, so many small people contribute in their ways, Jay. They go for a greener way of life, a sustainable way of life. They go into the forest, they rely less on electricity, they go back to basic living. So maybe it won't contribute that much, but I think that will be the situation to go when everything is destroyed, Jay, by climate change. Everybody will have to go back to basics.
You're absolutely right, Roopmati. And, I think we have to recognize the choice is we continue as we are, and ultimately a lot of people die, including us and our progeny. And that would be the price. However they die, this situation will be fatal for a lot of people. I take your point on that, and so this is something that we here, you and me, have to continue to cover. That ThinkTech has to continue to cover, because we don't want to be the frog in the water, and right now I think we are. But very wise points. Thank you very much, Roopmati Khandekar. Thank you for this discussion and all our discussions. I'm your host, Jay Fidell in Global Connections. Thanks for watching. Aloha.
Aloha, Jay. Thank you very much.